The doorbell rang jarring and out of place amidst the smooth jazz drifting through our Austin penthouse. It was only 7:30 in the evening. Julian and I were in the kitchen making fresh pasta together, a post-honeymoon ritual we had established. The scent of sautéed garlic and basil filled the air. I was still holding the fork I'd been using to twirl the pasta when I went to answer the door, thinking it was just a delivery of one of our last wedding gifts. When the heavy wooden door swung open, the fork clattered to the tiled floor. Standing in the brightly lit hallway of the building were my parents, Harrison and Eleanor, and my two older brothers, Bradley and Connor. 5 pairs of eyes stared at me, each gaze carrying a different shade from my father's iron-willed determination to Bradley's unconcealed annoyance and Connor's awkwardness. My mother offered a thin, tight smile. "Surprise?" My mother said, her voice as brittle as glass. "The family thought it was time we had a little family visit." I stood frozen, stunned into silence. I didn't know whether to slam the door shut or invite them in. Julian appeared behind me, his hand a gentle grounding presence on the small of my back. "Raven," he asked softly, "is everything all right?" "My family is here," I replied, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Fortunately, Julian quickly composed himself. "Please come in," he said as I remained motionless. "We were just making dinner." They stepped into our apartment, a world completely alien to them. My mother glanced around with undisguised judgment from the exposed brick walls and the collection of our friends' paintings to the quirky trinkets we had collected. My father stood stiffly by the door as if afraid that stepping further in would infect him with something. Bradley stood beside him, a solid wall of disapproval. Only Connor seemed curious, wandering over to our bookshelf. "This space is creative," my mother remarked, the word creative, uttered as if it were synonymous with bizarre. "Thank you," Julian replied politely, though I could feel the tension in his body. "Can I get you all something to drink? We have wine." "Water will be fine," my father finally spoke. "We don't intend to stay long." The air was thick with unspoken words, suffocatingly so. Julian retreated to the kitchen for water, leaving me alone to face them. "Why are you here?" I finally found my voice. "How did you even know where I live?" My father took a step forward, his lawyerly demeanor on full display. "We need to talk," he said, his voice cold as ice, "about this wedding charade of yours." Charade. The word was a match struck against a tinderbox of memories. Instantly, I was no longer in my Austin penthouse. I was back in my childhood home in Highland Park, Dallas, a perfect mansion with meticulously manicured lawns and pristine white fences. A perfect family, the father. Harrison, a powerful oil tycoon. The mother, Eleanor, a high society woman whose main role was to maintain the appearance of perfection. And 2 older brothers, the golden boys, destined to follow in their father's footsteps. And then there was me, Raven, the only daughter, an unexpected addition and a discordant note in the family's perfect symphony. From a young age, I was different. While my family was immersed in neutral tones and conservative styles, I was drawn to vibrant colors and bold patterns. The question that haunted my childhood, my family's mantra was always, "What will people think?" It echoed when I was 7, proudly announcing I wanted to be an artist. It echoed again every summer when I begged to go to art camp instead of business classes. But the most painful memory, the deepest scar, was the event that occurred when I was 16. It wasn't just any birthday party. It was my debutante ball, a grand event in Dallas high society, where the daughters of prestigious families were presented to society. My mother had been preparing for months. An ivory white ball gown, pristine and elegant, had been custom made. But a week before the ball, in a moment of youthful impulsiveness, my best friend Sage and I dyed a prominent streak of my hair, sapphire blue. I thought it was fantastic, a subtle personal touch. My mother was the first to see it. Her porcelain teacup froze mid-air, her eyes wide with horror. "Harrison," she called, her voice frighteningly calm, "you need to see what your daughter has done." My father's reaction was swift and decisive. "You will not attend the ball looking like that. Do you have any idea what people will think of our family? Do you know how much you've embarrassed your mother? Tears and promises to wash it out, an impossible feat were useless. The decision was made. On the night of the ball, while my peers were dancing under crystal chandeliers, I was sent to my grandmother's house in a small town, sitting and looking at her old stamp collection while trying to swallow my tears. The photos later showed a perfect family without the quirky daughter to ruin the beautiful image. Those memories flashed through my mind as I stood opposite them in my apartment. I looked my father straight in the eye. "A charade?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger, but this time it was not the weakness of a 16-year-old girl. "I'll tell you what a charade is." Julian returned with a tray of crystal water glasses, his calm presence an anchor in the impending storm. He placed the tray on our reclaimed teak coffee table, a piece my mother would undoubtedly find too rustic. No one touched the glasses. "A charade?" I repeated, my voice steady now, fortified by years of fending for myself. "A charade is living a lie, Dad. It's constantly trimming yourself down to fit into the mold the family deems appropriate." I turned my gaze to Bradley, my ever-perfect older brother. "Let's start with your and Tiffany's wedding, shall we? Do you remember Mom?" I turned to my mother, who was looking at me with a deeply wounded expression. "You called me not to ask if I wanted to be a bridesmaid, but to suggest my attire. You said Tiffany wanted an elegant color palette, and my deep purple hair at the time would disrupt the harmony. You even kindly booked an appointment for me at your hair salon." The memory flooded back as clear as yesterday. That phone call, my mother's sweet but imposing voice, and then the handwritten note that came with the invitation on fine stationery. "Dearest Raven, the family is so looking forward to you coming home. I think a long-sleeved cream dress would suit you well to cover up your artworks. We all want the attention to be on the bride and groom, don't we?" "My artworks," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You spoke of my tattoos as if they were a shameful disease that needed to be covered up." I compromised. "I wore that boring long-sleeved dress in the Dallas June heat. I used a thick layer of concealer to hide the drawings on my arms. I put my hair up as neatly as possible. And what was the reward for my efforts to fit in?" I didn't wait for an answer. I was seated at a table at the back of the reception hall with the children of Dad's distant business partners, people I had never met. During the family photos, the photographer constantly needed to change lenses or adjust the lighting whenever it was my turn for more intimate shots. I overheard Tiffany's mother telling another guest, "It's such a shame about the Harrison's girl, she could have been so beautiful." Silence enveloped the room. Connor couldn't look at me. Bradley crossed his arms, his face hard. "You always had a tendency to exaggerate," my father interjected, his tone dismissive. "Those were just minor details." "Minor details?" I burst out laughing, a laugh devoid of any joy. "What about Grandma and Grandpa's 50th wedding anniversary party? My invitation arrived 2 weeks later than everyone else's, and it came with a subtle request that I not bring Julian as it was an intimate family event. We had been dating for almost a year then. Everyone knew about him. But he didn't fit the standards of the Dallas Petroleum Club, did he?" I turned to Connor, the younger brother I once thought might understand me better. "And then there was your wedding, Connor. You didn't even have the courage to call me yourself. You texted. You said that because Elizabeth's family was very traditional, and the ceremony would be held at Highland Park Presbyterian Church, it would be better if I came alone. You said that Julian, a sculptor with tattoos on his arms, might make them uncomfortable." "That's not what I meant." Connor mumbled, his face flushing. "That's exactly what you meant," I retorted. "You made it clear that the man I love, my partner, was not welcome. You said his presence would tarnish the perfection of your happy day. And that's when I realized. All those times weren't isolated incidents. It was a pattern. A repeated message, Raven, you are only welcome if you hide who you truly are. You are only part of this family if you pretend to be someone else. So no," I continued, feeling as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. "My wedding was not a charade. It was not an act of teenage rebellion. It was a conscious decision. Julian and I decided that on the most important day of our lives, we would be surrounded only by people who love and accept us unconditionally. The friends who have become my true family. People who never ask me to be less Raven so they can feel more comfortable. We did it all because we wanted the best for you. My mother sobbed, the tears I was all too familiar with beginning to stream down her cheeks. We wanted you to have a good life, a secure future. No, I corrected gently. You wanted me to have the life you thought was best. There's a big difference. The difference is between success and failure. My father roared, finally losing his calm facade. Look at you, living in an attic in a city full of eccentrics, calling yourself a tattoo artist. You've thrown away every advantage we gave you. He turned to Julian, his eyes filled with contempt. And you. I don't know what you've been saying to my daughter, but this life is not the future we envisioned for her. With all due respect, Mr. Harrison, Julian spoke for the first time, his voice calm but firm. Raven is living the life she chose, and she's more successful than any of you can imagine. She's the owner of a highly rated art studio, a respected artist, and the happiest person I know. My father sneered an unpleasant sound. Drawing on people's skin is not a career. It's a phase, a whim that will pass, and when you realize that it will be too late. His words, uttered with the absolute certainty of a man who had never been wrong in his life, hung in the air. But this time, they had no power to hurt me. They were just echoes from a world I no longer belonged to. That phase will never pass, I said, my voice eerily calm, because this is not a phase. This is who I am. My calmness seemed to enrage my father even more. He was losing control, something Harrison Sterling never tolerated. Don't you talk back to me, he yelled. After everything we've done for you, all the opportunities you've thrown away. Opportunities to become a carbon copy of Mom, I interrupted. To marry a rich man, spend my life organizing charity events, and worrying about whether the gardener trimmed the hedges correctly. That's not an opportunity, it's a gilded cage. How dare you? My mother gasped, a hand flying to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. You don't know what I've sacrificed. I know you sacrificed who you truly are. And that's your tragedy, not mine, I replied, a sadness creeping into my anger. I will not repeat that mistake. Bradley, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, his voice cold and judgmental. You're so selfish, Raven. Do you ever think about how your actions affect this family's reputation, Dad's business, Mom's social connections? So that's what it's about, Julian interjected, his voice still calm but sharp as a knife. Not Raven's happiness, but your reputation. That was the statement that broke the final dam. My mother, in a moment of uncontrollable anguish and frustration, screamed the words pouring out like a toxic torrent. Do you know how embarrassing it is, Raven? She sobbed, her voice breaking. Do you know how humiliating it is to have to explain to friends why my only daughter has drawings all over her and weird colored hair, to have to lie about your job to avoid questions? We've always been ashamed to introduce you to anyone in our social circle. The room fell silent, deadly silent. The confession was finally out. No longer cloaked in false words of concern or worries about my future, just the raw, ugly truth. Ashamed. They were ashamed of me. I felt a strange peace wash over me as I faced the truth I had always known deep down. As if a wound had finally been correctly diagnosed after years of dull ache. Thank you, Mom, I said softly. At least now, we all know exactly where we stand. Eleanor, for God's sake, my father hissed, but it was too late. The genie was out of the bottle. I think it's time for you all to leave, Julian said, his voice no longer polite but firm. Raven and I are having dinner, and this conversation is clearly not benefiting anyone. We're not done, my father protested. But I am, I replied. I've heard enough. I walked over and opened the door, an unmistakable invitation. I will not apologize for living my life. I will not apologize for being happy. And I will certainly not apologize for not inviting people who have always been ashamed of me to the happiest day of my life. If this is your choice, my father said, his face hardening into a cold mask. Then don't expect anything from us in the future. No support, no inheritance, nothing. I looked him straight in the eye. I never expected anything from you except love. And since I never received that unconditionally, I learned to take care of myself a long time ago. They filed out defeated and angry. Bradley shot me a contemptuous look. Connor couldn't meet my gaze. My mother paused at the threshold, her hand reaching out as if to touch me before pulling back. I didn't want it to be like this, she whispered. I know, I replied, an infinite sadness washing over me. But this is what you created. The door closed behind them, and the apartment suddenly became too quiet, as if all the air had been sucked out with their departure. My legs gave out. I slid to the floor, the strength I had maintained throughout the confrontation finally dissipating. The full impact of what had just happened hit me all at once. Julian knelt beside me, pulling me into his arms as the tears finally fell. Not tears of weakness, but wrenching, violent sobs releasing decades of pain and frustration. He said nothing, just held me tight, a solid, warm presence. He let me cry, let me shed the weight of a conditional love I had so desperately tried to earn. That night, long after the tears had dried, and we were curled up on the sofa under a blanket, I received a text. It was from Connor. I'm sorry about tonight. They shouldn't have ambushed you like that. Anyway, your wedding pictures on Instagram look beautiful. You look so happy. It was a small, fragile olive branch, but in that moment, it meant everything. It couldn't erase the hurt, but it was a glimmer of light and acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, one of them saw me, the real me. 3 months after the confrontation, our apartment was completely cleansed of the tense remnants of that night. It was filled again with laughter, the smell of oil paint, and the indie rock tunes flowing from the Bluetooth speaker in the corner. The emotional wound had begun to scar over, no longer throbbing at every touch, but a quiet reminder of a strength I never knew I had. That Sunday, the Austin sun flooded through the large windows, casting a golden dust over the wooden floor. The apartment buzzed with the chatter of our chosen family. Sage, my childhood best friend with hair, now the color of cotton candy pink, was in a heated debate with Mateo, a muralist with a thick beard, about the merits of street art versus gallery art. Julian was in the kitchen making coffee, occasionally chiming in with a witty remark. This was my world, a world built on mutual respect and a love for creativity. Here, no one asked me to hide my tattoos or change my hair color. On the contrary, my tattoos were topics of conversation, stories shared. My current blue hair was praised by Mateo for having the depth of the ocean at twilight. Hey, Raven, Sage called, pulling me from my thoughts. Do you think you'll ever get a full back piece? I smiled. I have an idea for a phoenix rising from the flames, but it needs time to develop. A phoenix? Mateo nodded, his expression thoughtful. That suits you. I knew he wasn't just talking about the art. Brunch stretched into the late afternoon. When the last of our friends had left, leaving a pleasant quiet, Julian came and wrapped his arms around me from behind as I washed the last of the dishes. A great day, he whispered into my hair. The best, I agreed, leaning my head against his shoulder. He turned me around, his eyes searching mine, seeing past the smile. Are you okay? I'm okay, I said, and for the most part, it was true. It's just, sometimes there are still echoes. I see everyone laughing, and a small part of me wonders why my own family couldn't be like this. Because they chose image over person, Julian said, his voice gentle but without pity. That's their loss, not yours. He was right. I knew he was right, but healing isn't a straight line. 2 days later, on a busy Tuesday afternoon at the True Ink studio, as I was finishing an intricate design on a client's shoulder, my phone buzzed with an unknown number from Dallas. My stomach tightened. I had blocked my parents' and Bradley's numbers, but this one, I excused myself from my client and stepped into my private office. Hello? I said, my voice wary. Raven. It's me, Connor. I was silent for a moment, trying to regulate my breathing. What is it, Connor? Listen, I know you probably don't want to talk to me. His voice sounded nervous. But I'm coming to Austin next week. There's a fintech conference. He paused as if gathering his courage. I was wondering if you'd want to get coffee, just the two of us. My mind reeled with questions. Was this a trap? Were my parents sending him as a peace envoy? Or to spy why? I asked directly. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear him take a deep breath. Because, because I owe you an apology, Raven. A real one, not over text. And because I miss my sister. The last sentence got to me bypassing the defenses I had so carefully constructed. He was still my little brother after all, the boy who had built blanket forts with me and secretly read comics under the flashlight. I'll think about it, I said, my voice still neutral. I'll text you. That night I told Julian about the call. He listened intently without interrupting. What do you think? I asked when I was done. I think it's your decision, he replied, taking my hand. But whatever you decide, I'll be there. If you want me to go with you, I'll go. If you want to meet him alone, I'll be waiting at home with a glass of wine and ready to listen. He squeezed my hand gently. Just remember, you are in control of this meeting. You have the right to leave whenever you feel uncomfortable. His words gave me strength. I was no longer the passive young girl swept along by the expectations of others. I was a grown woman, the master of my own life. I thought about it all night. Connor's apology might not be sincere. The meeting could be a disaster. But if there was even the slightest chance to salvage a relationship from the ashes of my family, perhaps Connor was the only place to start. He was the only one who had shown any remorse. The next morning I picked up my phone and texted him. Okay, Thursday 10 a.m., Cosmic Coffee on South Lamar. Just the two of us. When I hit send, a feeling of both anxiety and determination washed over me. I didn't know where this meeting would lead, but this time it would be on my terms. I was no longer the girl waiting for an invitation. I was the woman setting the rules. Thursday, 10 in the morning. I arrived at Cosmic Coffee and Beer Garden 5 minutes early. I had chosen this place deliberately. It wasn't a sleek, quiet Highland Park-style cafe. It was a rustic, sprawling beer garden with picnic tables, food trucks, and a small pond with ducks. It was loud, vibrant, and quintessentially Austin. This was my territory. I wore my favorite ripped jeans, a t-shirt from a local band, and worn leather boots. My blue hair was loosely tied up. I hadn't made any effort to look more presentable. I came as myself, like a warrior entering a peace negotiation, but without laying down my weapons. I saw Connor sitting at a secluded table in the corner, and the sight almost made me laugh. He was in an expensive business suit, no tie, but he still looked completely out of place, like a penguin lost in a tropical jungle. He looked nervous, constantly checking his phone and looking around. When I approached, he shot to his feet, awkwardness written all over his face. Raven, thanks for coming. Connor, I replied, not smiling. You have 15 minutes. We sat down. An awkward silence fell. He was the one to break it. I'm really sorry, Raven, he began, looking me straight in the eye, and I could see a sincerity in his eyes I rarely saw. Not just about the wedding, about everything, for never speaking up for you, for being a coward, for always taking the easy way out, for prioritizing the so-called family image over my sister's feelings. I listened, my invisible shield still up. Cowardice is an accurate word. He nodded, accepting my words without excuse. Yes, I was a coward. When Mom demanded you hide yourself at Bradley's wedding, I was silent. When my parents excluded Julian from family events, I was silent. And when I asked you to come to my wedding alone, that's when I became part of the problem, not just a silent bystander. He paused, his voice choked. I have no excuses. I just want you to know that I realize how wrong I was. Seeing you stand your ground in your apartment that night, facing all of them, it made me realize something. You are the strongest person in this family, and we treated you like you were the weakest. I took a deep breath, processing his words. My guard was deeply ingrained, but his confession had an undeniable weight. Why now, Connor? I asked the real question. Why after all these years? He looked down at his iced coffee, stirring it absently. Elizabeth is pregnant. A girl. He looked up at me, and this time I saw a vulnerability in his eyes. And I keep thinking, what kind of father do I want to be? Do I want my daughter to feel like she needs to change herself to be loved by her father? Do I want her to hide who she is to please others' expectations? He shook his head. No, I don't want that. I want her to be free to be herself no matter who she becomes. And when I thought about that, I realized how miserably I had failed my own sister. I can't be the father I want to be if I can't be a better brother. That's when my shield began to crack. This wasn't a rehearsed apology orchestrated by my parents. This was something deep personal, driven by one of the most powerful life-changing events, the prospect of parenthood. Your apology means something, Connor, I said honestly, my voice softening. But it can't erase the scars. It wasn't just isolated events. It was the feeling of being excluded my whole life. I know, he said quickly. I don't expect you to forget everything. I just hope that we can start over. Build a new bridge, one that belongs only to the two of us, that has nothing to do with Mom, Dad, or Bradley. He told me about Elizabeth, about their excitement and fear of having a baby. He asked about my studio, about my work, with a genuine curiosity I had never seen in him. He asked about Julian, and when I told him about our love, his support, and how he helped me find peace, Connor just nodded and said, I'm happy for you. You deserve that. The conversation lasted for over an hour. When we stood up to leave, the initial awkwardness had melted away, replaced by a fragile understanding. Thank you for giving me this chance, he said as we stood by my car. I'm glad you called, I admitted. In a spontaneous moment, he stepped forward and hugged me. It was a slightly clumsy, unfamiliar hug after years of distance, but it was warm. Take care, Raven, he whispered. You too, and say hi to Elizabeth for me, I replied, as we let go. As I drove back to the studio, a mix of emotions washed over me. The pain was still there, but alongside it, there was a new feeling. It wasn't complete forgiveness, not yet. But it was a glimmer of hope. A fragile olive branch had been extended across a dividing chasm, and I had chosen to take it. The bridge between us might still be weak and need careful construction, one brick at a time, but for the first time in a long time, I felt that maybe it wasn't impossible. 4 months passed. The fragile bridge between me and Connor gradually became more solid. We didn't talk on the phone often, but there was a steady stream of messages. Short, pressure-free texts. He sent me 3D ultrasound photos asking for my opinion on the nursery paint color, mint green or butter yellow. I had replied, why not paint a starry night sky on the ceiling? I sent him pictures of my latest tattoo work, and he would respond with sincere compliments, no longer with judgment. It was a new relationship built on the fragments of the old, and it was precious. One Friday morning, as I was sketching a design for a client, my phone pinged. It was a message from Connor. No greeting, just a photo. A newborn baby, tiny, red and wrinkled, wrapped in a white and blue striped hospital blanket. Below the photo was a simple caption, She's here, Clara Maeve Sterling, 7 Elbs, 2 O's. I stared at the picture, and a wave of complex emotions hit me so powerful I had to sit down. First came a pure, unadulterated joy. A new human, my niece. A part of me, in a way. She was perfect. But right after the joy came a profound sadness, like a sudden knife twist. This was a major family moment. In Dallas, there would be excited phone calls, flower baskets being delivered, and my parents, now grandparents, proudly boasting to their friends. I was completely on the outside of all that. I couldn't go to the hospital. There would be no picture of me holding Clara. I was a secret, an aunt who existed through text messages. That evening, I showed Julian the picture. He wrapped his arms around me as I silently leaned against his shoulder. You can feel both things at once, he said as if reading my mind. You can be happy for Connor and sad for yourself. Both feelings are real. I knew I had to do something, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. I wanted to welcome Clara into the world in my own way. Instead of ordering an expensive gift from a luxury store, I spent the weekend in my small art studio in the corner of our apartment. I took out the softest cotton fabric and began to cut and sew. I didn't make a typical pink or white blanket. I created a patchwork quilt. Each square was a story: a deep indigo night sky embroidered with silver thread constellations, a field of vibrant wildflowers, a blue whale swimming in a turquoise ocean. It was unique, colorful, and completely Raven. The hardest part was the card. I wrote a dozen drafts. In the end, I wrote a simple sentence from the bottom of my heart. "Welcome to the world, little Clara. May you always know the joy of being yourself. Love, Aunt Raven." I sent the package on Monday, not expecting much more than a thank you text from Connor. But the person who called me that Friday night was not Connor. Raven. My mother's voice, artificially sweet, came through the phone. I hadn't blocked her number after my meeting with Connor, a decision I was now questioning. "Hi, Mom," I replied, my tone guarded. "I'm calling to say, we received your gift for Clara. It's very creative." There was that word again. Everyone's talking about it. I could picture the scene. My quilt lying amidst a pile of silver gifts and designer clothes, standing out like a peacock among pigeons. A topic of conversation, another piece of evidence of my otherness. "It was a gift for my niece, not for everyone to comment on," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Oh, don't be so sensitive, dear," my mother said quickly. "I just wanted to say, seeing little Clara, it's such a miracle. It makes you realize how important family is." She paused, and I knew the main attack was coming. "She needs to know all her family. Your father and we're getting older, Raven. Don't you think it's time to put all this nonsense aside for the sake of the baby?" And there it was. They were using my niece, a tiny newborn, as a tool of manipulation, a pawn in their game. They hadn't changed. They had just changed tactics. "My relationship with Connor is separate," I said, my voice like steel. "And my relationship with my niece will be too built on my terms. As for the rest of the family, nothing has changed, Mom. The apology I deserve has never been spoken." "Raven, don't be so stubborn." "I have to go," I interrupted. "My client is waiting. Good night." I hung up before she could say another word. My heart was pounding, not with anger, but with a powerful sense of self-possession. I hadn't been drawn into an argument. I hadn't let guilt gnaw at me. I had drawn a clear line. I felt exhausted, but also free. An hour later, as I was cleaning up the studio, my phone pinged again. This time it was Connor. It was another picture. Baby Clara, fast asleep, wrapped in my colorful patchwork quilt. Her tiny face looked so peaceful amidst the constellations and wildflowers. Below the picture was a caption: "She loves it. Thank you, Aunt Raven." Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they were tears of relief and love. Our bridge had held. My authentic gift had reached the one it was meant for. And in the small, colorful world I had created for myself, that was all that mattered. Summer in Austin arrived early and fierce. 6 months after Clara was born, I had settled into being an aunt through a screen. I had witnessed her first smile, heard her first coos over FaceTime, and watched the short videos Connor sent me daily. I was a digital aunt present in my niece's life through pixels and Wi-Fi signals. It was a connection that was both sweet and painful. One Tuesday evening, while I was on a video call with Connor, Clara was sitting on his lap gnawing on a rubber toy. She had Connor's eyes and Elizabeth's wide grin. "She's growing so fast," I said, a wave of affection washing over me. "Unbelievably fast," Connor agreed, smiling down at his daughter. He hesitated for a moment, the joy on his face replaced by a familiar look of anxiety. "Listen, Raven, there's something I need to talk to you about." I was immediately on guard. "What is it?" "Elizabeth and we're having Clara baptized next month at Highland Park Presbyterian Church." I was silent. That church. The symbol of the world I had fled. where expensive outfits and fake smiles mattered more than genuine devotion. The unspoken invitation hung between us, heavy and fraught with pitfalls. "I understand if you don't want to," he began. "Am I invited, Connor?" I asked directly, not giving him a chance to soften the blow. "Or is this just an announcement?" He sighed, running a hand over his face. Clara gurgled, oblivious to her father's tension. "Of course you're invited. I want you there. Elizabeth does too. But, Mom and Dad, what will they do?" I asked. "'Cause a scene at their own granddaughter's baptism." "No worse," he admitted. "They'll treat you with ice-cold politeness. They'll make you feel like an alien in their collection. There will be whispers, and Bradley will look at you like you just stained his Persian rug." His description was so accurate it made me shiver. That was exactly what would happen. Every effort I had made to protect my peace would be torn apart in a matter of hours. "Then why are you asking?" I said, my voice a little harsher than I intended. "Why put me in this position?" "Because there's something else," he said, his voice lowering. "Elizabeth and I have been talking a lot. We want you to be Clara's godmother." My world stopped. I stared at his face on the screen, speechless. Godmother. It wasn't just an invitation to attend. It was an offer to be a core part of Clara's life, an official church-recognized role. It was an olive branch, not just extended but rooted deep in family soil. Are you serious?" I stammered. "Completely serious," he affirmed. "It was Elizabeth's idea. She said she wants Clara to have a role model in her life, a strong, independent woman who isn't afraid to be herself. Someone who will teach her that her value doesn't lie in how well she pleases others." He looked directly into the camera. "She was talking about you, Raven." Tears began to sting my eyes. I turned my face away so Connor couldn't see. "My parents will never agree," I said, my voice hoarse. "They don't get a say," Connor replied, and I heard a new firmness in his voice, one forged by the love for his daughter. "This is our daughter, and this is our decision. But we won't do it without your consent. We understand what you would be walking into." That night, Julian and I talked for hours. I paced the living room, my emotions in turmoil. Part of me wanted to scream, yes, to seize this chance to formalize my place in Clara's life, to prove to them all that I couldn't be erased. But another part, the part that had been hurt so many times, screamed no. It warned me of the judgmental stares, the backhanded comments, and the profound loneliness of being in a crowd that called itself family. "This isn't a simple decision," Julian said, his voice thoughtful. "They're giving you a beautiful gift, but they've wrapped it in sandpaper." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, feeling helpless. "If I say no, I'll hurt Connor and Elizabeth, the only ones who have really tried. But if I say yes, I have to walk back into that lion's den." "Then you walk in as the lion tamer, not the prey," Julian said. "You need to talk to Elizabeth. Alone. You need to hear this from her. You need to be sure she understands who you are, and that she really wants that for her daughter." He was right. I needed to hear it from the mother. The next day I called Elizabeth. She answered immediately, her voice warm and friendly. "Raven, I'm so glad you called." I got straight to the point. "Elizabeth Connor told me about your offer. I'm so touched, really. But I have to ask you frankly, do you know what you're asking? Do you know how your family has treated me? Are you ready for your daughter to have a godmother with tattoos and blue hair who will never fit the Highland Park mold?" There was a short pause. When Elizabeth answered, her voice was unwavering. "I know all of that, Raven. I've seen it. And that's exactly why I want you. I don't want my daughter to grow up thinking there's only one way to be a successful and respectable woman. I want her to look at her aunt and godmother and see courage, creativity, and the joy of living an authentic life." She sighed. "My in-laws, they are good people, but they are trapped in their own world. I want Clara to have a door to the outside world. You are that door." Her words dissolved any remaining doubt. This was real. It wasn't a trap. It was a conscious choice from a mother for her daughter. "Okay," I said, a firm resolve forming within me. "I'll do it." Oh, Raven, thank you, she exclaimed, relief evident in her voice. But on one condition, I added. I will come. Julian will come with me. I will wear a dress appropriate for church, but I will not hide my tattoos. I will not change who I am. You will get the real me or nothing at all. That's all we ever wanted, Elizabeth replied instantly. When I hung up, I felt a powerful surge of energy. I was no longer afraid. I was nervous, sure, but the fear had been replaced by a clear purpose. I wasn't going back to Dallas to seek their approval. I was going back for Clara. I was going back to take my place not as the rebellious daughter, but as Aunt Raven, the godmother, the guardian of an authentic life. I opened my laptop and booked 2 plane tickets to Dallas. When the confirmation email popped up on the screen, I smiled. The game had changed. This time, I was writing the rules. The flight to Dallas was like stepping into a time machine. The dry heat, the sprawling highways, and the invisible sense of old money and rigid expectations enveloped me as soon as we left Lovefield Airport. We stayed at a boutique hotel in the Bishop Arts District, an artistic and bohemian oasis in the heart of Dallas. It was a universe away from the world of Highland Park, and it was exactly what I needed. On Sunday morning, I stood in front of the mirror, Julian leaning against the doorframe watching me. I had chosen an emerald green silk dress. The cut was modest knee-length, but the color was bold and strong. Most importantly, it had short sleeves revealing the intricate tattoos on my forearms, like living lace. I wasn't hiding. I was simply present. "Are you ready?" Julian asked, his voice gentle. I took a deep breath. "I'm not here to fight," I said as if to reassure myself. "I'm here for Clara." Highland Park Presbyterian Church was exactly as I remembered it, a massive limestone structure imposing and cold. Inside, the air was cool, smelling faintly of polished wood and lilies. The attendees, friends of the Sterling family, looked as though they had just stepped out of a Ralph Lauren catalog, pastel dresses, pearl necklaces, and navy blue suits. As Julian and I entered, a ripple of silence spread through the nearest pews. Quick glances, discreet whispers. We were an anomaly, a wrong note in a carefully orchestrated symphony. I saw them sitting in the front row. My father, his back ramrod straight, staring ahead, but I could see his jaw was clenched. My mother, in a perfect beige outfit, wore a strained social smile for the person next to her, but her eyes kept darting towards us. Bradley and his wife Tiffany looked at us with undisguised contempt. Connor and Elizabeth turned around and their faces lit up with genuine relief when they saw us. Elizabeth, looking a bit tired but radiant, gave a small wave. Connor nodded at me, a nod that held both gratitude and apology. We sat in the pew directly behind them. I could feel my father's gaze like a physical weight on the back of my neck. Julian gently placed his hand on mine, and his presence was a solid shield. The service began. When the time came, the pastor called the parents and godparents. Me. Julian, Connor, and Elizabeth walked up to the altar. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, on my blue hair, on the tattoos visible below my sleeves. But when Connor handed Clara to me, the outside world faded away. She was so small and warm in my arms. She looked up at me with big, clear eyes, free of any judgment. In that moment, it was just her and me. I heard the pastor's voice, but the promise I made silently in my heart was my own. "You will always be safe with me," I promised her. "I will teach you to love yourself. I will be your shelter from the storms." As the pastor made the sign of the cross on Clara's forehead with holy water, a single tear rolled down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of a fierce love, a sense of belonging in a completely new way. After the service, there was a small reception in the church hall. That's when the real test began. Family friends came to greet Connor and Elizabeth, glancing at Julian and me with unconcealed curiosity. I was prepared for the awkward questions, the forced compliments. But the first person to approach us was my mother. She came to my side where I was holding Clara. "She's so lovely," she said, her voice striving for normalcy. "She looks so perfect in this little white dress." Her words held a message perfect meant traditional, pure, unblemished. Unlike you. I looked down at Clara, then up into my mother's eyes. Yes, she is perfect, I said, my voice calm and clear. And I will always be here to remind her that she is perfect no matter what color she wears or who she decides to be. My mother was stunned for a second. She had expected defiance or submission. She had not expected a simple, firm declaration of my purpose. She didn't know how to respond. She just mumbled something about needing to greet a friend and hurried away. It was a small victory, but it meant the world. I hadn't argued. I hadn't been defensive. I had simply asserted my place. My father kept his distance, observing from afar, chatting with his business partners. He didn't come near. His silence was a form of admitting defeat. He couldn't control this situation. I was here in the heart of his world, holding his granddaughter, and I had done it entirely my way. Julian stood by my side the whole time, a silent, protective presence. Connor and Elizabeth kept coming over to us, forming a small circle of support, a new family forming right in the middle of the old one. As we were preparing to leave, Connor hugged me tightly. "Thank you," he whispered. "You have no idea how much this means to me and Elizabeth." "I did it for Clara," I said, and it was the truth. As we walked out of the church back into the bright Dallas sun, I felt an immense sense of relief. I had entered the lion's den not as prey, but as an invited guest and important participant. I hadn't changed them, nor did I expect to. But I had changed the dynamic. I was no longer the outcast daughter. I was Aunt Raven, and I was just getting started. Autumn brought a change. Clara was almost a year old, a bright little girl with a heart-melting smile. My relationship with Connor and Elizabeth had become a stable and precious part of my life. The once fragile bridge was now paved with solid stone. The call came on an October evening as the leaves outside my apartment window were turning a rusty gold. "Aunt Raven," Connor's voice boomed, and I could hear Clara babbling in the background. "I have a big question for you." My stomach tightened a little. I was getting used to his big questions. "Thanksgiving," he said without beating around the bush. "It's at my parents' house this year, and Elizabeth and I really want you and Julian to be there. It's Clara's first Thanksgiving. Elizabeth says it won't be complete if her godmother isn't there." Silence. I could hear my own heartbeat. A church service was one thing. It was a public, structured event with a clear beginning and end. But Thanksgiving was different. It was a long, forcedly intimate day trapped in the house that held so many ghosts of the past. "Connor, you know that's a difficult request," I said slowly. "I know," he admitted, his voice full of remorse. "And if you say no, Elizabeth and I will completely understand. There's no pressure. But I had to ask. For her. And for us." That night, Julian and I sat down together again, a familiar ritual when facing the twists and turns of my family. "I feel like I'm walking a tightrope," I confessed. "Every step I take towards Connor and Clara seems to pull me closer to the eye of the storm." "Then we'll build a storm shelter," Julian said practically. "We'll go if you want to go. But we'll go on our terms. We'll drive, not fly. We'll stay in a hotel, not at their house. We'll arrive at noon and leave after dinner. We have full control of our car and our schedule. If things get too overwhelming, we just say thank you and leave." His plan was logical. It turned a potentially dangerous situation into a manageable mission. It gave the power back to me. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "We'll do it. For Clara." On Thanksgiving Day, as we drove into the Highland Park neighborhood, the familiar feeling of being an outsider returned. The massive houses, the perfect lawns, the judgmental silence. When we walked into my parents' house, the smell of roast turkey and pumpkin pie immediately enveloped us, a scent both familiar and foreign. Connor and Elizabeth greeted us at the door with warm hugs. Clara, now a wobbly toddler, shrieked when she saw me and ran to hug my legs. I picked her up, and her sweet baby smell filled my senses, dispelling some of my anxiety. My parents had adopted a new tactic, icy politeness. My father nodded at us. "Raven, Julian, My mother smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Welcome. Your sweater has such a festive color, Raven. My sweater was burnt orange, a warm autumn color. But in my mother's language, festive was a synonym for too flashy. Bradley and Tiffany pointedly ignored us. Dinner was a carefully staged play of normalcy. The conversation revolved around safe topics, the Dallas Cowboys, the economy, the travel plans of friends I didn't know. Julian and I were mostly silent, answering only when asked and focusing on Clara in her high chair. And then the moment came. Tiffany, Bradley's wife, turned to me with a sickly sweet smile. So, Raven, she said, her voice dripping with condescension, when Clara gets older and starts asking about those drawings, how are you going to explain them? The table fell silent. All eyes were on me. This was it. The trap had been set. They expected me to be defensive, to get angry, to prove that I didn't belong in their world. I gently set my fork down. I didn't look at Tiffany. Instead, I turned to Clara, who was happily smearing mashed potatoes on her face. I smiled at her. That's a good question, Tiffany, I said, my voice perfectly calm. I turned back to the table, my eyes sweeping over each person before landing on my niece. When Clara is old enough to ask, I will tell her that these are stories. Each drawing is a chapter in my life. I pointed to the bird escaping a cage on my wrist. This is the story of finding freedom. The wildflowers on my arm are the story of appreciating beauty in unexpected places. I looked up, meeting my parents' eyes, then Bradley's, and finally Tiffany's. I will tell Clara that our bodies are a canvas and our lives are art. I will teach her that what matters is not what other people think of your stories, but that you are brave enough to write them yourself. I smiled again, a genuine, unwavering smile. And most importantly, I will tell Clara that her aunt, her godmother, will love her unconditionally, no matter what story she chooses to write, whether on her skin or in her life. The silence that fell over the table was even heavier than before. But this time, it wasn't an awkward silence. It was the silence of an undeniable truth that had just been spoken. I hadn't attacked. I hadn't made excuses. I had redefined the terms in my own way. I had turned their weapon into a lesson about love and acceptance. Tiffany flushed and looked down at her plate. My mother looked confused. My father simply picked up his wine glass and took a sip. But when I glanced at Connor and Elizabeth, I saw them looking at me with eyes sparkling with admiration and gratitude. After dinner, as we were getting ready to leave, my mother stopped me at the door. "The quilt you made for Clara," she said, her voice small and hesitant, a rare thing for her. It's beautiful." It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, a small crack in the icy wall. "Thank you, Mom," I replied. "I'm glad you like it." As we drove out of Highland Park, away from the perfect streets and silent houses, I felt a deep sense of peace. I hadn't won a battle. I had done something more important. I had shown them that I no longer needed to fight. I had found my voice not by shouting, but by speaking my truth calmly and confidently. And at that Thanksgiving table, for the first time, maybe they had actually listened. A year after that eventful Thanksgiving, life had found a new rhythm, a balance I never thought possible. The bridge between me and Connor had become a two-way street, not just for video calls, but for real visits. He, Elizabeth, and Clara came to Austin in the spring, and I proudly showed them my world, the bustling True Ink studio, the colorful flea markets, and the roadside stands with the best barbecue in Texas. Watching Clara's godfather Julian, with his beard and intricate tattoos, patiently teaching her how to hold a paintbrush, Elizabeth turned to me and said, "This is what I always wanted for her." My relationship with my parents remained distant, but the acrimony had lessened. There was an unspoken ceasefire between us. They had stopped trying to change me, and I had stopped craving their approval. Occasionally, my mother would send a text asking about Clara, and sometimes she would add a question about my work, no longer using the word creative as a criticism. My father, during Connor's last visit, had sent Julian a bottle of fine whiskey with a short handwritten note. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter." It was the closest to an acknowledgement I would ever get, and I accepted it. Bradley remained an island of silence and judgment, but he no longer had power over me. His silence was simply background noise. The biggest change was not in them, but in me. I had spent my life feeling like a misplaced puzzle piece, trying to force myself into a picture that wasn't meant for me. Now I realized I wasn't the wrong piece. I was simply part of a completely different puzzle when I was painting myself. One Saturday afternoon, Julian and I were in our shared studio. He was editing photos from his latest project, a collection of portraits of artisans in small towns across America. I was sitting in front of a large blank canvas. I hadn't painted on canvas in years. My work was on human skin living canvases that carried their own stories and scars. But today I felt a different urge. I started to paint. No plan, no sketch. I let my emotions guide my hands. The colors flowed: the sapphire blue of my 16-year-old hair, streaked the emerald green of the baptism dress, the burnt orange of the Thanksgiving sweater. An image began to emerge. It wasn't a phoenix rising from the flames as I had once thought. It was a huge ancient tree. Its roots dug deep into a dark, complex soil, but they weren't trapped. Instead, they drew nourishment from that very darkness. The trunk was gnarled, covered in scars and patterns that resembled tattoos. And then from that trunk, strong branches reached out. Some branches were small, withered, almost broken, but others reached high and far, sprouting leaves of every shade. One branch blossomed with the faces of Julian Sage Mateo. Another, strong and vibrant, intertwined with a smaller branch, and on it, a new flower, was blooming Clara. The tree wasn't perfect. It wasn't symmetrical. It bore the marks of the storms it had weathered. But it was alive. It was resilient. And it was authentically beautiful. Julian came to stand behind me, wrapping his arms around me. He looked at the painting for a long time. "That's you," he whispered. "That's us," I corrected, leaning my head against his chest. "That's family." I realized that family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build. It's not a perfect house with a white picket fence, but a garden. You have to pull the weeds, nurture the good seeds, and sometimes you have to accept that some plants will never bloom. But you keep tending to it, because the beauty lies in the growth, in the resilience, in the unexpected flowers that blossom in the most unlikely of places. I was still Raven Sterling, the rebellious daughter from Highland Park. But now I was so much more. I was an artist, a business owner, a friend, a wife, an aunt, a godmother. I hadn't changed who I was to fit my family. I had expanded the definition of family to accommodate who I truly was. I looked at my new canvas, at the tree of my life, and for the first time I didn't see the broken pieces or the scars. I saw a masterpiece in progress, and I smiled, because I knew that finally I was home.